Hi, everyone. This is Britt and Bill back with another episode. And today we are so excited. This is my favorite content creator that I found and author that I found in the past year. And I hype up her work wherever I can. We are meeting today with Liz Bucar. She's a religious ethicist and professor of religion at Northeastern University, certified yoga instructor. Her popular writing has appeared in The Atlantic, the LA Times, Wall Street Journal, and she's the author of 4 books including the award winning Stealing My Religion, which has really changed some of my views quite a bit. And the reason that I wanted to have her on is twofold. First, her Substacks have been going very viral lately, and she's growing on social media as a trusted voice in religious and spiritual commentary. But also, personally, when people have asked me what I would have done differently in writing my last book, the number one
Mm.
thing that I say is that I wish I would have found Liz's work sooner and done a chapter or at least a section on how to steal from religion more ethically, which I have been learning from Liz. And so I'm really excited to have her on. So, Liz, thanks for being here. And if you don't mind, just kind of tell us some of your story and how you got into studying religion.
Okay, so thanks so much, Britt. I mean, you're such a great promoter of other people's work on social media. You're so generous with your sort of shout out to your large audience about my work. So I really appreciate you and our sort of budding online friendship in the last year. Okay, so how did I get here? It's a little bit my mistake. I am like my day job as professor of religion. I didn't study religion at all as an undergrad. Didn't take a single course. But after college, I moved to DC and started doing social justice work, and a lot of that overlapped with my expertise at that time in South America and Latin America. I had lived in Brazil for a couple of years, so I was really interested in social justice work there. And the Catholic Church is a big player. So I think I first came to my interest in religion sort of through that social justice lens, where I was like, okay, this is like something that has to be engaged. And I did work in DC, and I ended up at a group called Catholics for Choice, which is actually a pro-choice, pro-access to contraception Catholic
Mm.
organization. And that job kind of blew my mind a little bit. I think. I mean, I'm baptized Catholic, but I was not raised in the Catholic Church. I was raised in a Congregationalist church. My dad was Catholic. He used to joke that the Congregationalists are like the social club of Protestants. But I was raised in a Congregationalist church until sort of like middle school, when I no longer sort of accepted that sort of identity for myself. So I was a little familiar with Catholicism, but I hadn't sort of dived into sort of like all the sort of resources about safe motherhood and responsible parenthood and like sanctity of life, and all those could be resources for arguing for this sort of pro-choice access to contraception sort of like framework. And that like kind of just blew my mind. And so then it was kind of time to apply to graduate school, and I applied to law and public health and religion, because that's where I was working at that intersection. And I had no intention of getting a PhD in religion. I had no intention of becoming a professor even. My goal was to go back to DC. I deferred law school at Chicago and started a master's at that time only in religion at the Divinity School. And then I just kind of was like hooked. I was like, these are just such rich frameworks to be thinking within. I was really interested in gender stuff. I was like, oh my God, there's so much here. And then I quickly became a comparativist. So I started Arabic and Persian and started working in Islamic traditions. Anyway, I mean, this is already a long story, but I basically, when they were like ready, come to law school, I was like, nope, I'm going to stay here for the PhD. So that's like how I like by mistake got into the like kind of started the PhD program. But I think like my like interest in religion has also evolved. Like again, I think I went to graduate school with like religion is a little bit maybe of a problem in the world to be solved, or like a tool to do this sort of like social justice work. And I think that a lot of my early work is sort of looking at communities that are doing that and sort of trying to highlight that. But this last book that you just mentioned, Stealing My Religion, and my new book that's coming out in April, Beyond Wellness, are more personal, and they're more thinking about like, how is my own engagement with religion and spirituality? Like, what does that look like as someone who's non-religious affiliated? I mean,
Yeah.
people in Mormon would call me a nun, right? None, right? Or a spiritual, not religious. I don't know if I really like those titles, but that's what I
Yeah.
am. But I'm also a religion professor who like deeply interested in sort of engaged in like sort of these religious communities. And I just sort of realized that like there was some personal stuff that I was also figuring out and working through with my like, highbrow scholarship objective. Like there's no objective space to study religion is sort of what I come to think about. So now I'm in this like new space, and I think that's the space that you and I kind of met,
Mhm.
right? Where I've started doing more public facing work. I've started exploring my own sort of identity and thoughts and concern. I like sit between skeptic and seeker, I think. And that's like new for me to name that. Skeptic is fine. Like, yeah, scholars were
Yeah.
skeptics, but this like seeker identity, that's like a new thing for me a little bit. So like, what does it mean to think about doing, I don't know, like public theology for non-religiously affiliated people? What does it mean to be engaging these religious ideas at this particular political moment? What does it mean for the new book? What does it mean for all these spiritual practices that I'm like interested in? Like, what are their religious roots? Could they work better for me if I understood them? Are they not working for me? Are they hurting me because I don't understand those roots or I don't believe in those roots? So that's what the new work is about. And I think what's interesting is finding people. I mean, we're like don't do quite the same thing, but like you're a conversation thought partner for me. My Substack grew kind of quickly for me. I think because people were already feeling this. Like people were like, God, the wellness industry is like not working for us. Like it didn't do what we thought it was going to do. I don't want to convert to a religious tradition. I don't want to steal or appropriate from indigenous communities or Eastern traditions either, right? Like I think we're in that particular moment now where we're concerned about that,
Yeah.
which maybe people weren't like in the 70s and 80s, right? But like, so what do I do? Like, how do I engage? And that's the stuff that I'm like trying to figure out for my own self, like real time. And that's what my writing's about.
Mm. So good. And I didn't know your backstory. I didn't know how much you actually came from religion or not. And so it's really interesting that you have, not that you can have fully, like you say, an objective opinion on religion, but it's interesting that you weren't, really raised in a hardcore spiritual tradition and you just find religion so fascinating.
Yeah, and my mom is extremely religious and
Mm.
she continues to be. But I'm so like religiously ambiguous that some of my colleagues don't actually even know about my identity. So I once had a colleague introduce me as Jewish at a talk because my partner's Jewish, so he's Jewish, and I was
Oh.
like, what, Jung, I'm not Jewish. Like what? Like where did you get that right? So like this idea of like that's like a scholarly thing, right? Like some of us don't put our identity into our work,
Mm.
and I've just really flipped that in the last couple of years, where like my identity is really driving the work because I think that I have questions that are informed by my engagement with others who are also in that
Yeah.
space of like seeking and
So
skepticism.
this is a really big question, but it's what of your work that has changed me the most. And so I want to just give you it's a hard question for me to ask you because you wrote a whole book on it. So I'm basically being like, "Hey, like tell me your book in a sentence." But
Yeah.
can you just speak a little bit to what you think secular people in particular are missing when it comes to uh when we're in this atheist, secular, agnostic space, we're always talking about there's a baby in the bathwater. In every podcast, you hear this phrase, there's a baby in the bathwater. How do we steal the good things from religion and do it in the
Yeah. Yeah.
secular context?
Yeah.
And what do you see as the main things that we're missing when we're trying to do that from the secular side?
Yeah. So I mean, a couple things. I think what you diagnose is a little bit of the problem that I talk about in the last book, Stealing My Religion, which is what I think a lot of people are concerned about cultural appropriation, but not about religious appropriation.
Mm,
Because like religion is like powerful and maybe bad, or we don't like it, particularly those of us who don't have religious identity, right? So we feel totally fine like stealing from them.
mm,
And I think that last book was me being like, whoa, whoa, wait, hold on. There's something self-righteous about that like position. Like I want to do your things, but I don't want to be you. Or I can do your things and get the benefit without any of that doctrine and dogma. And so like that last book was me thinking about like what kind of harm do we cause when we do that? Like harm to communities, harm to traditions. A lot of that book is about whiteness and my own sort of privilege, like what kind of how am I interacting with white supremacy when I do some of that stuff? I wasn't like not trying to, but I just
right.
was. And I
Yeah.
didn't
Can
realize
you
it,
give an
right?
example? I think you do like 3 kind of concrete
Yeah,
examples in that book. Can you kind of bring that down to
yeah.
an
So that
example?
book is, yeah, I mean, that book talks about 3 different things: a political example, a health example, an educational example. So, I mean, the educational example is about me taking students on the Camino. I used to run a study abroad for like over 5 years on the Camino de Santiago. We go to Spain. We study comparative religion in Spain, southern Spain, so amazing. Then we walk the Camino, this pilgrimage route in northern Spain. And we're walking supposedly to like the bones of St. James, but his nickname in Spain is also Matamoros, the Moor killer. So, like, what does it mean to not know and to erase that history of St. James also not only being a disciple of Christ, but also being considered the more killer in this Spanish history? That's just like a little example. Like the erasure, I think, causes harm. I mean, another example in the book that also is in the new book is yoga, because that's a great example because everyone has some access to it. 10% of us actually practice it. It's not considered religious by most people. But yoga, depending on how you practice it, there's a really great story in there that I borrowed from my friend Rumia about her practicing in this Texas yoga studio, and she herself is South Asian, and somebody making a joke out of namaste, like let's namaste this together, and Rumia feeling like that feels a little bit like I don't like that's a little cringy to me. Let me explain to you why, and kind of having a little bit of a confrontation, but feeling like it's a teaching moment because she's also a teacher and her getting kicked out of the yoga studio as a result. And her realizing that studio was a studio that protected white civility and it was a space for white people feeling comfortable about yoga and appropriating things from her culture. But, God forbid she says something about how it makes her feel. And then suddenly she was a problem, disorderly. So like those were the examples. I mean, really that book is I'm pretty honest about like it's about me exploring my own discomfort and it's about making you a little uncomfortable about things that you're doing and understanding how
It
you're
definitely
interacting.
made me uncomfortable about how I practice yoga because as like
Yeah,
any white woman, I've walked into a YMCA and just walked into yoga and thought nothing of it, really didn't
yeah,
connect it to anything. And
yeah,
so much of it can become like make sure that we're doing these poses like so our abs look a certain way or some like fitness
yeah,
nonsense that gets like wrapped into it and it totally changed how I
yeah.
like how I saw that. Yeah, it really called
Yeah,
me
and
out.
I call that sort of like respite yoga or on this new book, wellness yoga. It's still yoga, right? But like I feel like it's not doing as much as it could do. I think in this particular political moment, it's also like bypassing yoga, right? Like you go to the yoga studio to unwind and to unplug because the world is on fire around us. Like there's a lot going on. But it's like this retreat and it's this individual practice. So like you said, make your butt look good or your abs look good or whatever. And it's not connected to tradition or community or ethics in the way that, or a whole bunch of things were way that those traditionally those asanas were connected to a whole bunch of other sort of things, right? So this new book, Beyond Wellness, is sort of like, okay, fine, I made you all feel guilty. I made myself feel guilty, right? But like, what do we do now? Because I'm a teacher of religion. I don't want people to withdraw from religion and like I don't want to be another place where we're siloing each other. Like, well, it's not for me. I can't do it because it's connected to if you take yoga. And, oh, maybe it comes up in these like Eastern traditions, not just Hinduism, but a whole bunch of different Eastern traditions have these sort of like different lineages. Okay, well, I feel like that's like foreign and Eastern, so I don't want to engage in it. That's not what I'm going for. I want people to understand why they're drawn to these practices and realize that like religion is not just practices. It comes with all this other stuff, and that other stuff might be helpful. And that's really why the new book is called Beyond Wellness. I think wellness is too low of a bar. So you probably did your first YMCA yoga, and I did my yoga for decades as wellness yoga. That's what I was looking for. I was looking for the things that I'm being told now. What my BMI, I'm perimenopausal, right? So how much protein I have to eat. All these things are like wellness markers, right? Well, guess what? My wellness markers are on point. My lean body mass, it's good. My BMI, it's good. I'm not as I'm aging fine. That's not enough. That's like only one part of a fully human life. And some of this other stuff that we've just sort of left behind when we just took whatever the baby out of the bathwater or however that sort of metaphor plays out, right? Might be stuff that's useful for me thinking about real well-being, real human flourishing. So yoga is one of those things. And that the new book is not so much like, let's go find some ancient pure version of yoga and we will do that today and we will get all the benefit from it in this extremely devotional ancient way, because like first of all, that's impossible. That's not how religions work. They're like constantly shifting. There's no original thing that you're looking for. Modern postural yoga is a modern thing. You can't just find like one case of it that's more pure, more authentic. I know people want that. I get the impulse, but that's not what this book is about, because that's just not how religions work. But if we take seriously like the history of yoga in the West and we see like what was intentionally taken out of it, like what were we not shown? What were you not shown at your YMCA,
Mm,
right? Make it safe to be taught at the YMCA, which is, at its roots, a Christian organization,
right.
right? which is also super interesting. The YMCA comes up in another chapter about spiritual fitness. YMCA is fascinating. So what was taken out to make it comfortable for you, make it comfortable for me, or make it comfortable for my mom who learned how to do yoga and teach yoga in the 1970s? How was it? And how was that like a distancing from like Eastern traditions or new religious movements? And what kind of like maybe problems were there in that erasure? And what would it mean to take seriously some of that religious container? And yoga is a super complicated answer because I'm not going to be like study Hinduism and bam, you got it. I mean, if you want to really dive into religious roots of yoga, you have to figure out what type of yoga, what lineage you want to do that dive into. And again, it's not like resurrecting for me, because again, I want to stay non-religious affiliated. I think that's my lane. I don't think I'm like converting to something. I don't know. I love Rainn Wilson. Maybe he can convert me to Baha'i. I don't know. But like, I'm not planning on converting.
Yeah, they don't allow women at the top and they don't allow for gay marriage. So I don't see you going
There's
there.
a couple of deal breaker for me. I mean, I just wrote a piece about trust. I think trust is actually ultimate trust in something is also a deal breaker for me. But anyway, so I'm not trying to convert, but I do feel that I think about these religious traditions and all this stuff, like all this container that we kind of erased as the conversation partner that I want to have about like, how can this work better for me? So if you just take the case of yoga, something very simple is that the postures were always connected to this ethical framework, the nama and yamas. Now, maybe that ethical framework, the actual content of it doesn't line up exactly with my list of things, but I have core values. And so how do I connect my physical practice, make it a way to remake myself that's consistent with those core values? Opposite of spiritual bypassing, how do I make me more politically engaged? How do I help, how do I find a studio that isn't a place where whiteness is maintained? So my studio pays full-time instructors healthcare. It has a very diverse teaching faculty in terms of like many sort of axes, right? Like in terms of age, gender, race, body size. I love all that. So how do I find spaces and communities that I want to practice with? Like there's all kinds of questions that religious container has me ask in my practice versus like going back and finding some pure yoga and doing that today.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. As we're talking about how to ethically utilize rituals, actions, behaviors, meditations out of religion and do so in a way that's appropriate, that has us spending time to understand where those practices come from and what went into creating those so that we can respect them and respect the people who created them. I know you've spent some time talking about psychedelics, and I've done a lot of drugs. I'll just be honest.
I have not, Bill. So you have. Okay. I have not.
Done ayahuasca.
Have you done ayahuasca?
LSD, cannabis on a regular basis, and name a bunch more, but I want to be careful. So I'll just say that I feel like I've used them pretty responsibly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yet, I know a lot of people come out of high demand fundamentalist religion, and a lot of people come out of the one I came from, Mormonism, and often do a lot of risky behaviors trying to figure themselves out. They feel like the system that they don't trust anymore gave them a lot of rules, and they're trying to figure out which rules are real and which ones aren't. And so I see people who utilize substances in ways that I feel maybe are a little reckless at times, or not as responsible, for sure. And I'm just curious, as you talked about the ethics of utilizing things within religion, what are your thoughts on the ethics of psychedelics and what's appropriate, what's not, how should they be used? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of things you just said I want to touch on. So one is that like, there's the ethics of like, what do we owe communities and traditions, right? So that's sort of like, again, that's a lot of the focus of Stealing My Religion. So the question then for psychedelics becomes, if you're taking something, say like plant medicine, is this coming out of an indigenous community? Are they raising red flags about this? Oh, this is now getting over harvested. We can't have access to it now, ceremonial, because like whatever, or the medicine doesn't work the same way for us anymore because now it's being commodified. And I understand. So I actually have learned a lot from sort of talking to people about indigenous understandings of plant medicine and thinking about plants, not just as respect for, but as actual kin that we owe things to. And so that extraction process means like the medicine can't work as well for you in that kind of worldview. So really there's like that sort of understanding and respecting that, those kind of traditions. But then there's the other part of like risk that you're bringing up, which is like, what's the risk to me if I do this thing? And that's a lot what the new book is about. Like, okay, fine, maybe you don't care about like hurting other religious traditions or communities' feelings. I tried to make you feel bad, but it worked on Britt. Maybe it didn't work on you. But what about you? Because this stuff is powerful. That's why we do it. So you should know what the hell you're getting yourself into a little bit, right? Like, and psychedelics. So psychedelics is a chapter of the book. I am not someone who does a lot of drugs. In fact, I do not do drugs. I do not drink. I would make a great Mormon. I never really liked drinking because my dad was an alcoholic, which is also in the book. But I am very hardcore, like straight edge when it comes to things like not wanting to do drugs. I grew up with Nancy Reagan. She said, don't do drugs. I don't do drugs. I don't like to like break the law, like all kinds of reasons. It had to be in the book though, because that is a place where people are doing spiritual wellness stuff, right? That's people are looking for these big experiences, these big like crack open your head, mind, mystical experiences. And psychedelics are going to be legalized. I mean, I certainly think in the next decade, all of them are going to sort of just become more mainstream. You want to live in Oregon to get access to this stuff, right? So like I had to have a chapter about it. I did not want to do any of it. And we can talk about how I ended up doing some stuff. But for me, that's also important to engage these religious traditions because like if it's going to be legal, I want to like know the people and the communities that have been like working with this stuff, this powerful stuff for centuries. Because if it's like, this is true of all medicine, right? We forget this with spiritual practices. If stuff is like strong enough and powerful enough to work, then it's strong enough and powerful enough to have adverse effects for some people. But that's just like true of everything, right? And more is not always better, right? They take the mindfulness example. Just be mindful, meditate all the time. Like the more you do, not more is not always better for people. And I'm particularly concerned about like something as powerful as a psychedelic, entering even just clinical and therapeutic spaces without sort of this like any of this container, which is I think is like a lot of it as a safety container. So it's kind of, I think a lot of these chapters in this new book are kind of like getting you get informed consent. So I want you to know what you're getting yourself into because maybe you're doing a thing that you're like, shoot, I just completely cultivated a sense of self that eradicated a sense of self. And now I feel like confused and stuff that you write about, Britt, right? Like I've just created this existential crisis for myself by doing this practice that was meant to remake me in this metaphysical worldview that I just can't live with. It doesn't work for me. And now I'm, at the edge of the abyss or something. So I want people to know what they're getting themselves into. And psychedelics is one of those things, one of those practices.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in between you two as far as drug use. I've probably done more than you, Liz, but definitely less than my friend Bill over here. And this is one where before even I encountered your work, I had made some shifts in the ethics because at the beginning, it really changed my life in such a positive way so quickly for me that I like wanted to know everything about this thing. I wanted to share it with my friends because it felt like this amazing tool that would be selfish to keep from other people. And I apprenticed with 2 different guides and kind of learned under them. And then I actually did start guiding and providing this as one of my services. And realized within about 6 months that there were ethics that I was really not taking seriously. And I am at a point now where I don't do any guiding anymore. And I have a friend, colleague who has both sides of kind of this map that you're laying out. She has worked with Indigenous people and grows the product herself in ways that are sustainable, in ways that she was taught and has great respect for. And also she has some of like the trauma informed work and she's been trained in psychedelic level kind of therapy that I'm not trained in. And so there's no reason that I should be just as a white person, just like giving people mushrooms and guiding people and blowing up their brains. I realized that, hey, I'm actually kind of operating outside my ethics here. And I had one woman, I don't think that I did her harm, but it was very clear that I was like outside really safe ethics for myself because she was in a marriage where she was like her body was saying no to sex, but she was saying yes, kind of one for a long term. And for the entire session, her genitals and breasts like hurt because her body's just kind of screaming at her like, I'm not okay. And I realized like, oh, I'm outside, like I'm outside my experience, like what I should be doing here. So now I'm in a space where I defer all of those kind of guiding sessions to someone who's much more qualified and has the ethical frameworks and containers much better than me. And then I do a lot of the reintegration therapy, which I am trained on, which I have a lot of more experience doing. And so we tag team because I was better at that and more trained in that than her. But I kind of had to like bump into some of those walls on my own and learn on my own that there are ethics here that like, especially as like white people deconstructing from religion, that like no one was really talking about. We were all just kind of like sharing these drugs with each other and not even trying to be unethical. Like we were just trying to help each other, but it ended up like ethical problems coming up that I didn't see
sort
at
of the
first.
Wild West
It
right
is
now.
the Wild
Yeah.
West.
That's how it was. And I think, there are people writing about this from within sort of indigenous frameworks, talking about it like in clinical settings and what sort of like review boards they'd want and what role they'd want for like indigenous sort of wisdom, indigenous leaders to be in that space. I mean, I think an interesting thing, and this kind of happened a little bit to you, Britt, is that sometimes you learn a lot about where this practice comes from and how it's used ceremonially or how it's used by a community. And you listen to what they say about your use of it. And they're basically telling you, this is not for you. Like in some ways you're like, your conscious, your whatever, your gut, whatever, how you talk about it was kind of like, this role is not for me.
No, it's not.
Other people can be in this role. And I don't, just because I'm like drawn to it or it worked for me, doesn't mean that this is, that I feel like this is appropriate for, again, in terms of who I am for my core values. I mean, a lot of my work is trying to get people to understand like, this is not a one size fits all. But like, if you understand your core values, and sometimes this stuff is just not for you, even if you want it or feel like drawn to it or feel like it's powerful. And that can be one of the consequences of learning more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, you talked a little bit about yoga. And so I had a yoga question here, but I actually want to switch that out for meditation. One of the things that you challenged, I think all of us on, is when we take meditation out of its roots, it can become this like practice that we do to like help optimize and be better in a capitalistic system because we have less stress so that we can work more. And we've taken meditation out of its, ethical frameworks and roots. Can you talk maybe a little bit more about how digging into meditation and how we, especially white people in the West, have kind of stolen it for optimizing? So much of this is, I feel like you're showing us more baby that we're leaving behind. Anyway, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So meditation, or maybe we just say the term mindfulness, because that's sort of the ambiguous term that's used everywhere, right? There's mindfulness programming in my kids' elementary school or public school. I didn't have that. There's mindfulness programming on my college campus, both through the Center of Spiritual Life, but also we have an academic minor. So there's, first of all, this, you kind of back up and be like, are we talking about mindfulness? And then mindfulness is kind of everything. So it's maybe nothing. But a lot of people think about their mindfulness practice or the meditation practice as having Buddhist roots. And that like narrative is really complicated because, first of all, it's not like meditation was a central practice of ancient Buddhism. It was like not something that even like monks did a lot of the time. So it's not like it's a core practice that we're like, oh, this is the heart of the Buddhism. So there's like things that have to happen throughout history for meditation itself, just to get elevated within different Buddhist communities. And I talk a little bit about that in that chapter. I mean, one of the answers is colonialism. It's a practice that they decide to sort of elevate and sort of give to laity without all the other sort of things that the monastics would sort of have to master before they would start doing this sort of powerful practice. So that's like the first kind of move that happened. And then when it came west, I think that sort of is I'm interested in sort of more near history, right? Where there's this move from taking versions of Buddhist meditation and saying this stuff is not religious because it works for people. So it can't be religious if it works for people. If we can prove, if the neuroscientists can prove that it's working, then it must not be religious. It must be accessible to everybody. and we'll put it in a biomedical sort of context, and we'll make it, that insurance can pay for it and hospitals can offer it, and you can get trained in it without any of that sort of religious worldview. So I just think the religious worldview is important, and partly because it may conflict and contrast with your secular worldview. And you may not realize that till you're pretty far into the practice. Often if people really get into meditation, they start learning more and more. And then there can be like, it's almost like a form of schizophrenia that you've created in yourself. You're like, I'm doing this thing and I'm creating this, but like, that's not, that doesn't match up with my sort of maybe more Western secular worldview. So that's like one thing that can happen in terms of like adverse effects. There's lots of ways to talk about what got left behind. I pulled out a couple different things that come up through the monks that I was working with and interviewing and doing silent meditation. One is that they talk a little bit about meditation being part of a stool, one of the legs of the stool, and that you really can't have it without other parts of the stool too, rather. And again, what other parts of your stool maybe are different, right? But they talk a lot about patronage and but also ethics. So I think a little bit about actually, so the mindfulness chapter is the chapter I have that if people pre-order, they can get access to it. And I made like a workbook to go with it because I realized people were like really interested in meditation and mindfulness and didn't sort of understand how, to do it better in a way that worked better for them. And so I kind of came up with like basically a list of questions, like, let's figure out what your worldview is. Let's figure out if your practice is just focused on yourself or your community and the world. Like, are all those things getting met? Is that important to you? What is your guide like? What is your teacher like? Even this idea of like having like a religious guide for your meditation and mindfulness. We don't trust religious institutions and we don't trust religious leaders, but I think having a guide and a teacher can be really valuable. And that's not just the teacher in me speaking. I just really think that having someone not someone who's like, I wrote a post about this, right? Like not someone who's like, you shall always follow me and worship at my feet and give me lots of money and buy my supplements or whatever, but more someone who sees their role as like getting you to the point we no longer need them anymore, right? But like helping you get to that point. I think that's a big part of it too, that we kind of forgot the importance of that sort of like master apprentice, teacher, student sort of role.
And I feel like 6 months ago, like we were talking about this, you were talking about this, or we were having a conversation about this. And then I feel like in the past month, this has become so apparent because when we took meditation or some of these Eastern practices and didn't take the ethics with us, this is when we're seeing so many large spiritual content creators only focus on inner work in this time, right? And you and I have been calling this out, like the Jay Shetty, who like his like I
still playing the same thing,
like
right?
Ezra Klein, like all these people that are just like, you know what, I'm just working on, what's going on in here, and it's like this focus of meditation and inner work, which is not bad. Like you never said that like that's wrong or that's bad, but you forgot the ethics that came with it. And now Jay Shetty, like his last podcast was with like Nara Smith and about her like makeup routine, and it's like, buddy, like your spirituality should have had something to say about the world today. Anything, like something, like something other than what Nara Smith's makeup routine is.
So this might be also, we should probably be honest, Britt, this might also just be a feature of like what you and I think is good and important about spirituality and religion. So like when I write, so my Substack is called Religion Reimagined, right? When I only want to reimagine a form of religion that is politically engaged and progressive, because that's who I am. So it's like liberation theology for nuns, right? In some ways, I'm not interested in like holding up forms of spirituality and religion and trying to get people to understand them more if what it makes them be is like less empathetic, right? Or less aware of what's going on in the world, or retreat. Like, why? So there are definitely people who are doing that and protecting their brand. And there are people who I think are like very sincerely religious, who are like, my religion is not political. But to me, that doesn't make sense. Like, I can't imagine, I want that from spirituality and religion. I want that kind of leadership and guidance right now. Like, what else? Again, if I'm thinking about religion as a conversation partner about human flourishing, full well-being, not just feeling calm, not just my BMI, whatever. I want you to talk to me about politics too. Yeah. I want you to make sense of what is happening right now. How do I interpret this? How do I move forward in this?
Yeah.
In this reality, right? Like,
Yeah,
how do I,
how I approach that is less about, like, not everybody has to be the same amount of liberal politics and see the world the same way I do and all of that. For me, it's like I got there through the journey of, um, looking at kind of these more masculine approaches to spirituality and then feminine approaches to spirituality. And a lot of times with masculine forms of spirituality, it's a lot about like leaving the body and transcendence and transcending the world and going to other dimensions. And what we see from like female mystics, which really changed me very deeply, was like this sense that your spirituality should make you more able to spend a week with your parents. You know, like it's embodied, it's in the world, it's in your body, it's in relationships. And so whether like however that shows up for you politically, because everybody has political values, and I think that conservative political values, like things like loyalty and things like that are not bad. Like I want all those values at the table. I just want you engaged in the world somewhere. Otherwise, I just see us going to this more masculine place of just like going to the mountain and transcending the world. And to me, that's just never
yeah.
brought wholeness.
So it's interesting because I think of like the non-engaged religion spirituality as itself conservative.
Mm.
Like I feel like it's not neutral. I feel like it's like a choice and it's a conservative choice. But I think the other way I think about it, it's interesting, the masculine and feminine, that's not usually the way I articulate it, but that's an interesting way of thinking about it. But I often just sort of articulate it in terms of like enlightenment did a number on us. Like the focus on the individual wasn't as good as we thought it was. And there's a reason why we're in a crisis of loneliness. It's because we're thinking about the spirituality and religion is like, what can I get out of this?
Mhm.
Like I think about all the sort of like, again, I look at the intersection of spirituality and wellness. So all this sort of like living forever, life hacks, like it's all focused on me. We forgot that that the human project was always a collective
Yeah.
project, right?
One of my
And
favorite
so
call outs was Jordan Peterson, who's very individualistic and more on the conservative side. And his thing is like clean your room, which is this sense that like take care of your uh, inner world in your life and your responsibility. And someone who was debating him, who had more of collectivist viewpoints, philosopher, said maybe we should look at the systemic reasons for why your room is always dirty. And it was like
yeah,
this big point of like, oh, I see what like he finally kind of
yeah,
got like, oh, I see finally what you're saying there.
yeah.
I want to ask you a question about leaving religion. Folks who leave, I mean, if you dedicate your entire life to a system,
Yeah.
and it's the lens you see the world, it's how you've made meaning, and at least in some systems you were manipulated to see it as having all the answers. And
Yeah.
so when people learn that the system wasn't true, and sometimes it happens overnight, I mean, they read a website that lays out the issues of for instance, Mormonism's history, or its changes in theology and its harm to marginalized groups, and they'll just deconstruct it in like a single night, and mentally, intellectually, they're done. They've checked out. They're ready to walk away, but it's their community that culturally they're still tied to it. Emotionally, they're still tied to it. And I'm always debating, like, what's the healthiness of staying longer and processing things slowly? What's the healthiness of stepping away immediately because it's not true anymore, and you value, maybe you value truth seeking over the community. You have any thoughts of that? Like how
Yeah.
people can, in the most healthy way possible, negotiate the deconstruction of their religion when the intellectual side moves much faster than the emotional and cultural side?
Yeah, and the relational side
Mm.
too, right? Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit outside of my own life experience and my own sort of expertise, but I mean, my first sort of thought is like to allow yourself to sit in the grief because, right, that's partly there's a mourning process that has to happen. And I think that the move from deconstruction to like constructing something new, that space might be quite big. And to so allow yourself to be in the grief for a while. I mean, the closest thing I have to personally like this, which I just actually wrote my Substack last week, is the kind of family rupture politically that I have with family members. And, it's interesting. I got a lot of advice like, well, if your parents don't agree with you or you have relatives that don't agree with you politically, you should just cut them out of your life entirely. And that's like just not something I'm willing to do. and you only have one set of parents. But what those conversations, I think thinking about how to have those conversations with people who are still in your community or in your family, that's like a really hard thing to navigate. So I think it's also like finding the people who are on that journey with you. So you have some sounding boards, whether or not that's like, a therapist or other people who are also deconstructing their faith, or some sort of like, spiritual guide. I mean, I'm not even sure what Britt does. I think this is what Britt does because she does all these things. But like, it's hard to do it by yourself because there are all kinds
I
of things.
think what people appreciated, I actually looked in the comments of that article, was that here was like a professor of religion saying, I'm struggling with how to talk to my parents this week and I don't really know how to do it. There was just like an honesty in that like, hey, this is hard even for me, someone who studies like religion and is very, politically, thinking about these
I don't
things.
have the answer to how to deal with these family dynamics.
Yeah.
Right. No, this is hard stuff. Like, I think that I had one of the comments, some of the comments were so thoughtful on that post, actually.
I think so.
Some of them, and some of them were like not, but most of them were. And one said, what you're feeling is another form of the grieving. Like, I'm grieving right now because what's happening politically in the US. I find this really, I'm mad and but I'm also sad, like, because I'm grieving for something that I thought was true and I thought was going to be true for my daughter growing up here, and I thought was true for just our communal values. But this comment was like, you're also grieving
that you couldn't call your mom. That like in that moment you couldn't call your mom, and like there, yeah,
and someone else said like, I'm feeling the same way, and it's because these are the people who gave me my core values, and we don't agree on what's happening.
Yeah,
and that feels like, again, a form of like moral injury, because I was like, but like, these are my values that you gave me. And so how are we not seeing the same things or feeling the same things or, worry about the same things? And so, yeah, I think that there are no easy answers to that. And, people leave religious traditions for all kinds of reasons. And sometimes it involves trauma. I mean, it always involves trauma of some sort, right? But that like kind of divorce thing from the family, from the community, and that sort of big form of loss is, it's very human, but there's not a really great way to like get over that other than to like grieve it and then start to build new relationships or start to build those old relationships in new ways too. Which is actually what I ended up doing with my mother. I mean, I haven't done the follow-up post. I'm trying to see if I'll do one, Britt. It's funny. My mom called me after I did that post within a couple hours. I knew she would. And we talked for about a half an hour about everything except for that post. And then I said, Mom, I think I know why you called me. And we had like a really good, frank conversation, a really honest one about what was going on. And, maybe that's a great beginning to something new and rebuilding something new and different, which doesn't have either one of us change our position, but it's something.
Yeah, I think we do have to learn to sit in disagreement somehow. And, we talk about it like the only way we can really all check our blind spots and reevaluate the way that we think about things and be open to changing our mind about stuff is to have different perspectives that are in the same room as us. And yet I think also, as you're pointing out, it's so difficult because some of it feels like, and I think in many instances can be real harm when you have to sit next to somebody who is just taking a position that you see as causing a detrimental effect in the world. And so a lot of times you just run back to some echo chamber and isolate yourself with the people who think the way you do. It's just such a hard thing to navigate, trying to figure out how you stay open to disagreement, while also not putting yourself in a position that you're just getting bumped into in ways that aren't in your best interest or your health.
Yeah. And I think, so, I'm actually an optimist at my heart. I'm like glass half full all the time. And so one of the things when I wrote that piece, people were like, forget it, cut them out of your life. Who cares about the whatever, the people on their side of the pew, whatever. We cut them out of our lives. We don't care about them. They're idiots. They're dumb, whatever. And I think that's wrong. I actually think in some ways I have a responsibility to have those tough conversations with the people who are closest to me, because my mom can hear me.
Yeah.
Because if I'm on the phone crying and saying, this is what I'm scared about for your granddaughter and for my daughter and your granddaughter, like, I need you to hear this and hear my pain right now. She can hear that differently because she does care about us, right? Than if I'm trying to have a fight with someone on the street. So I think I think that is a really important first step to, like, hopefully what I hope will happen again is something new. We're reimagining the US right now. We're breaking a lot of stuff, and hopefully we'll come out in a better space, but it's only going to happen if we can have these harder conversations. And I think starting with the ones that are people are close to you, those
Yeah.
closer circles, is a good
And
way
I
to
think this is a place where you can use privilege for good, in the sense that I'm not in direct effect of some of these. Like, there's some privilege to my whiteness and the way that I'm able to move about in the world. And so this is a time where, like, bridge building and holding space for those hard conversations is something that people who uh should, because, like, in my family I have a lot of MAGA Mormon family members, and I have a gay brother for whom, like, these conversations are so damaging to him and to his
too
mental
hard.
health, too hard. So,
Totally.
like, someone like me, like,
Yeah.
it is the right thing for me to be that person.
Yeah.
Like, this is a place where privilege can be used for something really
Yeah.
positive, because someone who's more directly affected, it shouldn't be just their job when it puts them in harm's way.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I told my mom, who feels a little bit insulated from this, I think feels like we're a little insulated unless I start protesting in Boston, which she's really concerned about, is I reminded her that my sister-in-law, her husband is Peruvian. So my sister-in-law's family is Latino presenting, certainly. And I'm like, Mom, that she is worried
Mm,
about these kids going to school
mhm,
and her husband going to work every single day. This is not just happening to other people. These are happening to, like, this is our extended family, your extended family, Mom, my
mm,
extended family. And so again, that, like, I can say that to her, and I can speak out because I'm not,
mhm.
I'm not a target in the same way, right? Like, I mean, no one's safe right now,
Right,
but what is
right.
the risk, and how can you use different levels of risk, you know,
But it's hard.
for for collective
Let
good.
me shift over to another recent Substack article. I've just been loving your Substack lately, to be honest. And I'm not usually a Substacker, but I never miss yours. And it was
I
how
write so much too, I'm so sorry.
it was
Wow.
all these surveys. There was this hullabaloo
Oh, yeah.
about the surveys that came out about religion, that young people are just flocking back to religion, right? And then there was kind of this counter survey that's like, well, we looked at the data more closely. That's not really happening the same way that, these original headlines were kind of saying. And then you kind of just said, hey, we're all missing the bigger picture of what's going on here. Can you talk to us about this bigger picture of what the hell is going on with religion and young people?
Yeah, so I think I'll get myself in trouble with all my very quantitative, statistical kind of, like, inclined people, but, I mean, you're right, there's this, like, I feel like every other month someone comes with a new survey being like, "Americans are less religious than they've ever been before." We asked them, "Are you religious?" And, like, only 30% said yes, or, "Is religion an important part of your life?" I heard that in in a survey to Americans, and a very small proportion said that it was important in their life. And I was, like, looking around politically, being like, "What are you talking about? Religion is important in everyone's life right now. It is, like, pushing national politics." So part of me is like, the questions we were asking are wrong on these surveys. And it's not, I don't think that, like, demographers are doing it intentionally wrong. I just think that, like, we don't know what we mean when we say religion. We don't know what we mean when we say spirituality. We all mean something different. We all think we know what we mean. So a survey doesn't capture the religious life in general, I think. So, if you ask, even I'm hard pressed. I'm working on, which Britt will get to read because she reads my Substack. I'm working on a piece trying to decide if I'm, like, spiritual or not, if I feel like I can own that title or not. And, like, that's me, who has been studying religion for 25 years. I can't even figure out, like, what I mean by this title, right? So that's part of it. The other part of it is, I think we are looking, if I think about young people, I mean, this is also true for millennials and my generation. I'm my Gen X, but I think it's particularly true of the young people. Everyone's interested in, like, what's going on with them. I think we look at them, we're trying to figure out if they're religious or not, using sort of like a boomer definition of
Yes.
religion. Like, if they're not part of a church, they don't claim religious identity, then they're not religious. And I'm like, I mean, my students who don't claim a religious identity in, like, say, one of the big 5 religious traditions, they still are really, really, really interested in religion and really engaged in it. And Maybe they'd call themselves spiritual but not religious. Maybe they're just engaging in their practices. Maybe they're just asking the big questions, but they're not like they're not necessarily atheists, and they're not necessarily anti-religion. They just don't use the same words. And so you ask them a question of like, do you believe in God? They're like, I don't believe in your God. No, I don't believe in God in that way. But then if you start to like probe around it, so I just think like to get a sense of what's going on with young people, you have to sort of have these sort of qualitative interviews. I think there's a lot of things going on with young people. I mean, I think there is some move back to conservative, fundamentalist, sort of like more rigid forms of religion. And I think that makes sense because there are very black and white answers in those traditions. And when the world is chaotic, that's helpful to some people. But that's not the only place I see movement, right? I think that's particularly gender. That looks like that's more young men. But then I also see all this huge explosion in interest of what people like me, religious studies scholars, probably wouldn't even pay attention to, whether it's like manifestation or tarot cards or like looking at these like more kind of new age spiritual practices as really a way to like add not just life hacks, but like understand meaning and purpose and give, again, some framework to them, or find community. Like looking at these rituals for all kinds of different things. So I think you just see like, we don't know what Gen Z is doing with religion. And we keep trying to like say, oh, they're doing this. And like, I don't think that's right. I don't think we know yet. I think they're having this big experiment. And they're not going to call it religion. It's going to look like religion to those of us who study and are interested in it, but they might, just give up on that title entirely. This is always also true that like sociologists of religion, every couple generations or every generation, some will say religion is going away entirely. And this is never true. It just kind of reinvents itself. And I think that's what religion does. It's a modality for change. It helps us get through change, and it itself changes. And so, yeah, I just think we're asking the wrong questions when we're trying to like figure out what's going on with Gen Z.
It's interesting. In again, the religion that I came from, we've got a social journalist, Jana Reese, who does a lot of research and folks who step away from Mormonism and people who stay. And just in the last month or two, tons of data has come out it really does depend at which angle you're looking at it. One is that there are a lot of the young adults who are stepping away. Mormonism is losing some degree, and I'm only speaking the United States, by the way, and it's happening in other countries too, but it also is growing in other countries. So I just want to keep this to just the US. People are stepping away, but also the people who stay, some of them are doubling down, which is a normal kind of brain thing that we do when we see sort of that threat. But even the ones who were staying, there was a large amount of them who were stepping back from the rigidity, the orthodoxy, the adherence to things. So they didn't see like wearing Mormon garments as important. They didn't care as much about drinking coffee or tea. So they show up every Sunday. They're more determined to be there. Their religious fervor to some degree is stronger, but their adherence to the things the religion says you have to do these things, it has pulled back. And so it really is interesting. Whatever religion it is, I think depends on how you ask the question and which angle you come at it.
Yeah. And what that cohort is doing then is changing what becomes central and core to that religion, right? To that community. Like certainly showing up, like you say, every Sunday becomes the important thing, not wearing the undergarments. I mean, in general, what the surveys are seeing is that we just have a general distrust of institutions. It's not just religious institutions, all kinds of institutions. And so they're like picking up on that, right? But like, you're right, there are some people who are doubling down institutionally. So then I guess I'm more interested in like, how are those institutions getting changed? What new institutions or collective sort of forms of collectivity are we creating to step into those spaces? Or will we be creating the next sort of decades that come?
Like what Bill said, it's been really interesting watching Gen Z redefine it, because in my generation, this idea that like, oh, I don't wear Mormon garments, I drink coffee, I'm still Mormon. Like Gen Z's claimed that for themselves. And as a millennial, I'm like, wait, you can do that? Like we never got a sense that like as a generation, we didn't, that wasn't a thing that we could do. And so it like the data is almost sometimes for us older Mormons like was really interesting to look at, like, wait, you can do that. But
I mean, the
Yeah.
thing that I love about them is when I look at these, like the seekers, right? I have to say I have like sort of this bias against the like 1970s, 1980s sort of new age seeking, where I just felt like a lot of it was appropriation. A lot of it was focused on the individual. But when I think about the Gen Z or my students who are interested in this stuff, like they're really concerned about those issues of justice and appropriation. They don't want to do it in that kind of harmful way. There is this sort of like um, authenticity what they're doing, but I also think urgency given the time that they're growing up in. And that may be why we see so much different things happening. It's kind of different responses to the real difficulties that they're living through.
Yeah. And something for me on social media that gave me a lot of whiplash was that in school and in these academic spaces, we use this term religion like so loosely. Like the definition that we were really working with when I was in theology school is religion is how you orient yourself in the universe. And it's just that everybody does it. And so Buddhism's considered a religion and astrology is considered a religion. It's just, hey, you've got to have some rituals and meaning and purpose, and how do you make decisions, and however you orient, we're just going to call that religion, because it's really hard to define this word that has meant so many different things over tens of thousands of years. And then when you go on social media and I say the word religion, you get that pushback of like, oh, Buddhism's not a religion. I'm not religious. This isn't religion, because it's very specific to like religion is only like if you're a nun in Catholicism, like that's religion, right? And so I have to be almost careful with my language. And I'm almost trying to, especially with atheists, trying to get them to inhabit more of the religious space, but I have to do it in a sneaky way sometimes, because if I call it religion, they'll just say, oh, all religion's bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's all indoctrination. And then I have to like almost be more, okay, well, let's look at the science of ritual. Let's look, and I have to like find these backdoor ways back into, hey, there's some things here that would be really good for you that we're leaving behind in the modern conversation.
It has such a PR problem.
It does have a PR problem, yeah.
I mean, well deserved, right? But like, it's really hard for those of us who work in that space to be like, but that's the word that describes what we're talking about. So I'm gonna play and see if I can use spirituality the same way. But spirituality has its own baggage, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's something I think Bill here has kind of been at peace with the term atheist mystic. And I'm trained as a spiritual director. And so I've just kind of called myself an atheist spiritual director, just to say like, hey, I'm pro spirituality. There's a lot of things here that's great. But if you want to like, just for aspects of trust, I'm not talking about that capital G God that your grandma talked to you about. You know what I mean? Like I'm not a fan of that. And that's kind of how I've made peace with it. But I'm curious for your next piece to see how you're going to land with these words, because all of them have a lot of baggage.
I have no idea how they all do have a lot of baggage. But I mean, I think there's a question of like who you're talking to too. Like you're saying, like when I'm talking to like my colleagues in religious studies, I would not use the word spirituality, because to them, spirituality is just a branding exercise that we use to describe the parts of religion that we're more comfortable with in this particular, historical moment. But when I talk to like my students or the general public, spirituality does feel different, qualitatively different to them than religion. And so I want to meet them where they are. I don't want to like be like, no, your term is wrong. You got the term wrong, right? So
sometimes I also just call myself a spiritual atheist, just because that's confusing. And then like, thank you. Now you're gonna ask me a follow-up question, and then I can give you like 2 pages on it.
Right.
So sometimes I do that on purpose to make you confused so that I can explain, because the language in the space is so hard.
Right. I mean, that's where I try to do the spiritual skeptic thing, right? Like I am like critical of places where religious logics are hidden and are showing up. And I try to like highlight those and be like, hey, by the way, this is all based on some like messed up, bad theology. That's what's going on over here. And that it just became so mainstream, you didn't see it. So I do that work, and that's sort of my most skeptical work. But then I'm just trying to figure out how to talk about the seeker stuff, the stuff that like wants to like, take more of the positivity and personally apply it to my life, I guess, and to my communities. Yeah.
Britt and I were talking before we jumped on to do this conversation, and we were talking about how humans have this just natural thing they do where when they see something they can't explain, they just immediately jump into some supernatural magical explanation for it. And if we see things that we can't, quite get at, it looks strange to us. Again, humans 10,000 years ago looking up at the sky and seeing these flashes of light and attributing the stories and narratives and myths that we did to them. And on the other hand, systems capitalize on magical thinking too, and sometimes at the expense of causing harm. The unhealthiest of religions sort of sabotage our propensity to attribute magic to things. And so I'm just curious, like, it seems like maybe there's some benefit for us humans, social cohesion, structure, of having myths that we unite over. And those myths don't always have to be involve magic, but in an age when we're sort of stepping away from religion to some degree, we've got the internet and AI here now, and we can ask questions and get answers in such a fast amount of time. Any thoughts you have on like how much magical thinking we keep, or how much magical thinking we should get rid of, and what the benefit or the harm is in either side of that coin?
Yeah. Oh, that's such an interesting question. So if I think about one way I used to describe my relationship to like my Protestant upbringing was that there was a moment when I believed in the magic, and then I didn't believe in the magic anymore. And I just couldn't be. And I kind of like grieved that. That was kind of cool to believe in the magic of, like, if you talk about the narratives, right? To believe in the magic that the narratives told me, the myths told me like had happened. Just like when you discover that Santa Claus is not real and you're like heartbroken. So there's something whatever, like kind of sweet and beautiful about that. I think I've thought a little bit about magic. So again, Gen Zers love this idea of magic. And I feel like magic is a lot in the sort of spiritual practices that are really popular right now. I guess it's come up for me in two places. One was the psychedelic ayahuasca experience I had, and the other was more recent work I just did about manifestation, which I have to say, I'm just started off as a very big skeptic of manifestation, because I just sort of thought about it through the like lens of what Instagram manifestation was trying to sell me, right? Like, just think some positive thoughts and you will like make a bigger house or a better car or a handbag, and then so that starts to feel like prosperity gospel, and it starts to feel like ignoring the fact that like you can't think yourselves out of like structural racism, right? Or like, why can't you clean up your room? Maybe there are structural factors why you can't clean up your room. So that form of magic I feel like is problematic. But then, the more I like learned about other forms of manifestation practices, like in community, where really it's about that process, that the magic is the process of in community figuring out what it is that you really care about and what your core values are. And then it's like this light bulb moment, and then you try to align your life to it. That magic seems really, really positive and really helpful to everyone. I mean, the other place, so I kind of started off as this like skeptic of the magic of manifestation. And then I guess when I put it in more of a framework of ethics, it became more clear to me. But the one place where like stuff I can't explain, but I think is meaningful, really can't for me, was in my ayahuasca experience. So I did not want, because I am not Bill, I did not want to do that chapter. I didn't want to do every chapter. I like do the thing, right? I didn't want to do the thing for that chapter. I certainly didn't want to do ayahuasca. I was like planning to do a little something, like maybe like, on someone's couch. But I wanted to do something legal, and I wanted to do something in a really sincere religious container, which is why I ended up in ceremony with a Santo Daime community for 3 days, in which they take ayahuasca 3 times a day. So I went like from 0 to 100. Yeah. And by mistake, by the way, again, like it just sort of happened very quickly. Like I had talked to the leader and I felt very comfortable with him, and he had an opening, and I had cleared my schedule for something else. And like I bought tickets like right away, and I ordered my white clothing, and I was like there in the yurt 7 days later. Like I didn't have time to even freak out about it until I got there, and I freaked out. And there are things that happened, and it wasn't the ayahuasca, it was the religious container of the ayahuasca that I just can't explain with my like, my skeptical religious studies scholar mind.
Yeah.
that are like really important part of that experience for me. So part of it is the Santo Daime community is a mashup of like Catholicism and Afro spiritualism. So they believe in mediumship. It's a really important part of their practice that people can channel all kinds of different spirits, like everything from like Jesus to like someone who's like dead, or to like a deceased African slave from Brazil or something. And so I'm in a yurt in ceremony with people who are mediums, who understand themselves to be mediums, who are channeling spirits. And I'm on ayahuasca, so I also think they're channeling spirits, right? And I mean, it didn't feel like a performance to me. It felt like something that was really there that I couldn't explain. Then other things happened to me where I had, I went in very skeptical. I tried to take as little of the ayahuasca as possible. I was like trying to take notes in the evening. Like I was really there as a researcher. I wasn't trying to have a mystical experience or, split my brain open. But by the third day, I was really physically reacting to things that were happening. Like I'd be on my side or back with my eyes closed, and then, sit up bolt upright when something happened that I didn't realize anything was happening. Like felt like something energy had like bounced off of someone and hit me or something. Or not being able to physically move when something was happening to somebody else, or like all that kind of stuff. I like have no way of understanding like logically how that happened. And the leader of the community, Jonathan Goldman, said to me, did you know that about yourself? I was like, no, what? He's like, that you're just like, very energetically sensitive to other people. And I was like, I mean, I know I like cry easily. I know I'm like affected by my teenager's mood. He's like, no, this is something that is like, you're very sensitive to this stuff. So, I mean, just that's maybe a takeaway from this experience. And I don't believe in that. But like, I also know that that's like what happened. So I think I came out of that experience realizing that like, there's a space between what I can explain and what I can't explain. And that's I can hold that complexity just like I can hold all kinds of other complexity of like the skeptic, the seeker, but also like knowable and maybe not knowable. Like I don't really understand what happened to me.
This is one of my
And
favorite conversations because I speak with so many skeptics, and we're all like, bagging on religion because it's one of our favorite things to do, like all the harms of religion and the stupid things that people say. And then as soon as like psychedelics enters the chat, we all start talking like mystics, and there's mystery and what the hell is going on, and
yeah.
making space for things. And yeah.
I mean, I would say I wasn't like, oh, mediumship is weirdo or like I don't believe in it. I would say like I totally had studied as an anthropologist before. I thought it was like fascinating, but to be in the room and be altered when it was happening was like, and it was also the fact that there were people who were faking it and got called out about it. So there's a whole like sort of very complicated dynamic going on. And there was an exorcism. I mean, like what all this stuff. I was like, whoa. Like I just did all of religion in 48 hours. Like we had exorcism, mediumship, like all this stuff. But I think you're right. And I don't know, I was talking to someone else about this experience. Like it's a combination of like having everything, all your barriers kind of removed because of the substance in your body. But then also for me, it was the religious container, feeling safe enough to like open up. Like there were guardians watching me. There were hymns to like sort of guide me through it. There was like an altar that like felt kind of familiar in a way. So that also I think was part of like what allowed me to have that experience. But yeah, psychedelics are wild.
Yeah. You take these things and I think the ill is in in a system, there's somebody at the top who says, I've had a spiritual experience and all of you should take my experience as the truth. I think where psychedelics in the space of like a shaman and a community doing it in a healthy way, there's this opportunity. Again, my ayahuasca experience was the shaman was incredible. And it was clear that everyone was completely safe to have their own experience. And I think that's true essentially across the board when people do ayahuasca, that you're safe to have your own experience and you get to make your own meaning about that. I'm not here to tell you what your experience meant for you. And then we got together the next morning to integrate that. So we all sat around in a circle and everybody had plenty of space to just talk and to share what they experienced, the meaning that they made out of it, so that all of us could collectively learn something from everybody as well,
Mm-hmm.
but in such a way that nobody was in charge of telling us what any of it meant. And I think where religion gets off track is where it imposes on the collective what these experiences mean. It denies access to the experience, so only the leaders of the tribe get to or the system get to have that experience. And anytime you have something that's different, and again, I'm often speaking about high demand fundamentalist religion because that's what I deal with all the time. There are healthy religions out there, or at least healthier for sure. I'm just curious maybe what your thoughts are about if we could create healthier religions that really allow people to have their own space
right now.
figure things out. Anyway, what do you want to think about that?
So, I mean, I think even though the story you just told, it wasn't like the teacher, the shaman, the guide was important to that experience, right? So for me, I think that there's a knee-jerk reaction against that sort of like leadership and that hierarchy, but I think that sometimes can be valuable if it's somebody who's actually quote, a good teacher versus like a false prophet or whatever, a charlatan of some sort. I think that's part of the secret sauce. For me, what made me feel safe in that year, again, I crying hysterically before I had to take the first serving of ayahuasca and was my nervous system was deregulated the entire time. It was just sort of a mess. But I felt safe, not only because there was this leader, but because there was a community that I felt like had seen it all before and knew it was coming. So that experience that they could share. There were literally guardians. There were literally 4 people sitting by the door of the yurt watching, who were also in ceremony, taking the ayahuasca, who I felt like were watching, make sure I was safe. But the other thing you said, though, Bill, I think is interesting in terms of like forcing an interpretive framework on it. The interpretive framework actually helped me for the Santo Daime community sort of ceremony, because so I think there's a difference between thinking about ayahuasca as a drug, an experience that you'll have, and medicine and a sacrament. So this community that I was with thinks about it as a sacrament. It's a really different way. And I couldn't quite get there. I like kind of got close to thinking about what that could be, but I couldn't quite. I think if I accepted that entirely, I would have had a really different and maybe much more even more profound experience. So I think some of that interpretive framework is helpful, can be helpful. I don't know how to build a new religion, and I don't think that one size fits all in any of this would really work, but I don't want to give up the idea of leadership or the interpretive framework.
Yeah. I think that's
either, but really the community is important too, that there was a community here.
There's a shadow side that we don't talk about a lot, which is if you only have your own experience and intuition without any guidance or someone to bounce ideas off of, or someone who's been down that path a little bit further than you, that there's a shadow side to that too that we're not talking about because we're so focused on the shadow side of religion. I just have one kind of follow-up question and then we'll wrap it up here. It's still about this topic of magical thinking, because when we're in this secular space, there was this Reddit post that went viral, and I asked the last 2 guests this too, which is like, what magical thinking thing do you do that, it's probably silly, but you do it anyway? And there was thousands of comments and people are like, oh my God, I do that too, where it's like you name your house and you take care of it as if it's like an entity, because humans naturally personify things. Or you drive into a parking lot and you say a prayer to Saint whoever to help you find a spot, and it just seems to help every time. And there were just thousands of examples of not capital H harm. None of this was like I kicked my kid out because they were gay or anything like that. It was all just like little brain tricks. Oh, when I look at the microwave and I see this number, I say this, or I do this, or I say this wish, and it just showed that, hey, there's something like really human about the ways that we kind of will play with magical thinking. And there's this rift that I see in the secular community of those who are more the Richard Dawkins type, who just say like, all magical thinking is harm because it's not capital R real. And anytime that we divert to these like superstitious things, we're not focusing our attention on real life solutions to real life problems. And the example that's given is like, we let people believe in souls and we say that it's harmless until we wanted stem cell research. And all of a sudden the soul people were like, we can't do that. And now we can't help people with spina bifida, whatever. And then you have this other kind of secular group, this more Stephen Fry group that's more open to like, hey, this is human storytelling, saying a prayer to a saint when you're looking for a spot. This is human, and we need to push back on the places where it causes direct harm. But you can't squash this out, and this is totally human and something we need to more fully embrace. Do you have, as more of a secular leaning person, do you have a sense on like where you lean with magical thinking like that?
So I think I lean pretty light on the magical thinking, but not intentionally. Like, why would we want not to have more magic and wonder and awe? I mean, the whole like focus on like what's reasonable and rational. So I'm in an apartment with religious studies and philosophers who I don't want to live just in the space of philosophy or rationality. That again, if we think about like whole human flourishing, that just seems to like
Yeah.
reduce so much of our human experience.
Somebody asked
I would
Richard Dawkins, like, what are some dragons that you've fought in your life that you've overcome? And he said, like, dragons aren't real. And it's like, that obviously wasn't the question, but like literally his brain could not get there. Like his brain could not do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I lament that the time period in my life when I was more magic in my life when I was younger. And I think, partly what I'm starting to think about, like I'm starting like volunteer hospice training, and I'm thinking about possibly hospital chaplaincy work maybe. And I think that's me thinking about mortality and death in terms of like the wonder and awe. I'm not sure magic is the right word for that, but the sort of leaning into the things that are not logically or rationally explained, as again part of like having lean into like fully like what it means to be human. So yeah, I think I'm not as magical as probably as I could be, but not necessarily by choice. Yeah.
As we finish up here, for people who have listened to this conversation and are hearing you talk about the things you think about, your life's work, one is, what is the biggest thing you would want people to walk away from, having looked into who you are and the work that you do, the books that you've written, the things that you spoke on? And then follow that up by telling us all the places that people can find you, where people can pick up the book, and anything else you want to say that would point people to you or your material.
Yeah. So I think because I'm a professor, people think that I have all the answers, but like I am in this work with you kind of thing. And so I think that people who will be interested in my writings are people who want to be in conversation with me. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people to be in conversation. And I'm really trying to be helpful to seekers and skeptics with sort of like offering some religious studies, sort of like content. But then a lot of the questions I have are like, they're open questions for me and I'm just trying to work out. So just sort of like, that's my position. And if that's of interest, that's kind of like, come find me. So how to find me? So I do a lot of stuff on different social media platforms, but if you're a reader, I start all that stuff usually with my Substack, which is Religion Reimagined. And then I'm at Liz Bucar on Instagram and TikTok, where I also post quite a bit of that content. My new book, Beyond Wellness, which is out in April, you can pre-order now. And if you go to my website, which is just my name, lizbucar.com, there's actually a pre-order incentive that I mentioned. Like you can get access to the mindfulness chapter right away and this like workbook that I like designed. And I think it's sort of like, I kind of think it's kind of fun and kind of like helpful for people thinking through this stuff. But then if you do show up on my Substack or on my social media, like comment and join the conversation. Like Britt was saying, she reads the comments on my Substack. Mm-hmm. My Substack comments are fire sometimes, right? Like people really are very sincere. Like these are big questions for us that some people get in there and they think they have the answer. It's fine. They let them do their thing. But most of us are just trying to like think through this all together. And so I'm actually just trying to create like a container, a community, a space for people to have those conversations together too.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us, Liz. Such a fantastic conversation. Can't wait for the book. I will be pre-ordering. And I mine your Substack and comments for new material, but I always try to tag you when you spur me on a new idea on something. And your work has really affected me. It's really changed how I look at religion in my own practices, and I can't thank you much for that. So thank you for being here and sharing your it's like you're sharing your thoughts and wisdom, but you're also just sharing your humanity, that like, hey, I'm just trying to figure out the best ways to do this too. And I appreciate the humility with which you enter that.
With
yes.
You guys. Thank you guys so much for the conversation. I really appreciate you both, and the kind of container you guys are trying to create.
Absolutely.
Here as
well. We are skeptics and seekers, and so that's why I need to be a great conversation partner. So everybody go check out Liz's work and her new book, Beyond Wellness, and thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Liz. Bye-bye.
All right, Bill, thoughts?
Help me out. So let's go back to the first question you asked, which I'm so intrigued by. The idea that we are stealing unethically from other religions, spiritual practices, and doing it in a way that's unhealthy. And I heard her express like, hey, we're taking these things, we're repurposing them without any time spent to understand where they came from, what their purpose was, who created them, why they were created, what benefit those things offered to those groups of people or systems that utilize that stuff. So I get like there's some personal accountability on my part to, if I'm going to do yoga, to understand what that really is and what it means and where it came from and all of that. What else would you want to say about that? Because this seems so crucial to you that I feel like I'm missing some part of what it means to do this ethically.
Yeah, I think for me, what it shifted, because my book, No Nonsense Spirituality, which was really the brainchild of so many of our conversations on Almost Awaken, I just had this sense of like, I don't like religion. I'm not going back, but there's some things in here that have helped me, that have science behind it, that are worth taking with us. I just want to steal all of it. I'm just going to steal it and take it and move on. And I feel like I didn't put any guardrails around how we steal. And she kind of fleshed that out for me. And it's not just like the history aspect. Like, I don't think it's fair to ask everybody who participates in the world to just like, oh, like if you read a newspaper, like understand the history of newspapers. And if you go to a yoga class, you have to like have a doctorate in yoga. Like, I don't think it's as much about that. I think it was more about really understanding that when you're stealing from something, what all that is. Because if you steal just psychedelics without a guide or a container for it, now you can start seeing things like psychosis because you've stolen something without its container. If you steal yoga without the container of ethics, it becomes white girl fitness yoga, and you're missing something that could be really helpful for you. If you steal meditation and just put it on an app without the history behind it or some of the ethical containers behind it, now it just becomes like a tool for capitalism instead of like what it really could be for you, which can help you a lot more than just like being productive in a capitalistic environment. And so I just was more like haphazard, I would say 5 years ago, in just like, I'm just going to take the stuff that works. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, I just want to steal from religion. And I really didn't have any container around that. And I think in doing so, I ended up sometimes whitewashing things, sometimes like my experience with psychedelics, where I realized I was outside of my ethical guidelines and had to like readjust. And for me, like her container, like when you read her book and she goes into this at length, it really shows you that there are more or less ethical ways to steal from religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting, we talked about psychedelics, we talked about drugs, and she was like, I don't use drugs. And then towards the end, it's like, I did ayahuasca, but of course she says like, I don't call that a drug. Like that was a plant medicine. I took this seriously. By the way, just to the audience, for those who've never done ayahuasca, you can't do ayahuasca recreationally. It's not something you're like, hey, let me get some friends together and I'm going to take some ayahuasca and we're just going to hang out and
have a good time. Play the guitar a little bit.
you're going to struggle to get off the floor. You're going to be throwing up in a bucket. You're going to be having visionary.
Even for mushrooms with me, are some people like feel like they can do it in like a sometimes in a social sense. It's so hard on my body. I hate doing it. Like as far as like
Mhm.
the day of, like it's hard on my body.
Same. I feel lonely. I feel completely separated. If I'm even in a group of people and we didn't take some gigantic dose, and the idea was for us to have fun, like sure, people will say things and we laugh and it's fun, funny, and there are these moments. But generally speaking, it's the moments in my life where I have felt the most alone, the most on my own, the most separated from any human connection. And I get things from it. I learn things. I feel like the experience was worth it, but I also feel like going from my normal reality into mushrooms, I always tell people it feels like I blasted off on a rocket, landed on an alien planet, and I'm like making my way through their rainforest, thinking there's predators all around me. And then towards the end of it, I'm like, oh, finally, this feels better. I like this, but it's sometimes a little scary and jarring and uncomfortable in a very negative way.
Yeah. And I do like the idea of the conversation of like, as we're trying to bring psychedelics back, because I do like for my depression, it has been the best thing I've ever done for my mental health. I'll do it. I used to do it every 6 months, and now I can push that to about a year. Um, but I have not had deep depression since being able to integrate mushrooms. And so like I want more people to have access to these tools, but the more I read, and I've even had clients come to me who experience like that they're unhinged and like they can't go to work the next week because like they've lost their goddamn minds. Like I think Liz is pointing to us that like, hey, the where this comes from, not just the history of the plant as like to nerd out and just understand the history, but like they developed containers so that you would go on these journeys and come back into community and have a mentor help you through that. And when you take the drug outside of the container, we can do real harm. And so she does that not just for psychedelics, but for yoga, for meditation, for religion in general. And I've learned like some ways that I can be more ethical because I am a fan of stealing from religion.
Yeah, I really appreciated the moment in the conversation where you expressed that you had delved into trying to be a resource for some of this stuff that you sensed, it sounds like pretty quickly, that you didn't have um, the experience, training, approach without those things,
Yeah.
that there was risk
And I
involved. That you were
tried,
going
like I wasn't trying to like, you
to,
know, like people who know me, like I wasn't trying to be a cult leader of a psychedelics group. You know, I wasn't one of those white women in Colorado who like becomes a cult leader doing psychedelics. And I apprenticed under two people. I was trying to learn. I did many like co-guided experience where we were guiding with someone and I was sitting with someone else and they were teaching me. I really took it seriously, and even so found that, you know what, there were better qualified people who had more of a connection to how to grow these plants sustainably and ethically, and also who had more background and training for the trauma aspects that come up. But what I'm really good at is as a spiritual director and doing so much work in archetypes and dream work and existential crisis and the void, that like I'm a great person for the day after I need to talk this through with someone and like reintegrate. I'm really good and really trained at that. But the other piece of sitting and guiding, I realized that there were better people for that. But I had to learn that like through experience. Whereas I think that if you look at Liz's work, you kind of have to learn less by experience, and you can get some actual guidelines on how we steal from religion ethically.
yeah, I just want to say kudos to you for having, because I think a lot of people would just go like, I'm doing this. This is my
And
thing.
it's
I'm gonna
good
do this.
money. Oh my God, the amount of money you can charge to fly someone in to do an experience with me, like you can charge serious money, but like, you know, I didn't feel ethically good about it.
Yeah, kudos to you for your integrity and making the decision that like I'm gonna end up hurting someone, or at least there's the risk here that I'm gonna hurt
Yeah.
someone. And so ethically, I just need to step away from this. I have friends, and again, I don't speak any ill. These are people I love and think the world of. I think they have so much awareness and development and capacity, and are trying so hard to do good in the world. But I have a few friends who have jumped into this line of work, and I don't know their work well enough to say they're not qualified. I can only say that watching from the outside, I get nervous about the thing you just said, which is, hey, you're taking on some liability. You're taking on some having to sit with having done damage to someone if it doesn't go well. I'll share this little story, and it's sort of separate from this, but it gets the point across, which is, and maybe I've shared this before with you. Maybe I shared it recently. I don't remember. But I was in a podcast talking about mushrooms. Does this sound familiar?
I don't think so, no.
I was on a podcast talking about mushrooms, and I told the audience, I said, there are dangerous drugs out there and there are safe drugs, and mushrooms have never killed anyone. No, you can't overdose on mushrooms. And I got done with that episode. I publish it, walk away. And like 4 or 5 days later, I get a phone call at the work. I was at Family Pond working, and I get a phone call, and somebody's like, hey, can I just talk to you for a few minutes? Do you have a few minutes? I said, sure. They said, hey, I listened to your episode. I just want to share a story with you. Like, on one level, you're right. You can take all the mushrooms in the world and you're not going to die of some health event. But we have a son who was just a normal kid.
Yeah.
And he did mushrooms once and he had a pretty good experience with it. So he decided to do it a second time. And his mind fractured.
Yeah.
And he had what we could only call a psychotic breakdown. And this happened 2 years ago. And just in the last 3 months, he's just starting to look like our son again. And it made me take a step back and go, I've got to be more careful about how I position these things, because I do think they're an amazing tool for 98.7% of people who take them. But there is a segment of our population who, with certain substances, may have a more fragile psyche, may have issues of depression, may have certain disorders or certain struggles with their mental well-being, that these things would be deeply dangerous to take. And prescribing them or giving sort of a blanket statement that they're great for everyone is just not good. So
especially with youth, that goes back to our conversation of like of healthy upbringing, that like when you do this kind of work too young, like you should actually feel that the world is real and you have a self and you have an ego and you're established. You actually have to do that and be like 25, like let your brain develop before diving into things that blow up your mind. Because I have friends in the ex-Mormon space who, their kids started to explore with mushrooms 17, 18, 19. And I wouldn't say they went fully to psychotic break, but I wouldn't call it healthy development, because now like the world isn't real and they're trying to find some kind of career so that they can stabilize, trying to find some kind, trying to just function in society. That tends to be better when this goes back to what we've talked about with ego work. Like it tends to be better to have some safety and security before you go on tinkering with your own brain and blowing it up. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think she's the best voice that I've found for speaking to stealing from religion with the container that came with it. And like, she's been the best voice for that.
She seems really great at having an ethical container around so many things in her world, that she comes off really balanced and grounded, and calling on all of us to pause, no matter what the topic is, to just ensure that we're moving through that in a responsible way.
Yeah, I really like her, and she's changed some things. And like I said at the beginning, if I could go back to my book, this is the piece that I would add that I feel like is missing, because I was a little bit more just like haphazard with like, hey, let's just take all this stuff. It's great. So yeah, and yeah, with mushrooms, I've seen some things that have made me more open to mystery. I've seen so many positive changes in people's lives, including my own. And I've been in this space long enough that I've seen some people that like we lost them, like they lost their minds. And I'm more aware of those dangers now than I was at the beginning, when I was like, oh my God, this is helping my depression so much. And I just wanted to give mushrooms to all my friends. And I kind of did for a little bit. And I've learned since then that there's more ethics to consider there.
Yeah, not to take this topic much further, but I'll just note I've got friends who, even just taking something like cannabis, have had what I will call some sort of seizure, or become very not really aware of the world, sort of just frozen. I've seen people become extremely pale and what looks like they might be on the verge of a health event. And so I do think with any of these things that folks just do need to be extra careful. And so sort of I'm saying this to the audience, which is, as we had a conversation around those things and some of the benefits of them, be extra careful about what you choose to do. They always have this kind of precursor of, talk to a doctor before you do this.
Yeah.
thing.
And I'm not a doctor. Like, so like the person that I refer people to now has much more experience. She actually worked with, the VA and with veterans and PTSD and how to make sure that they're in a good mental state. And she'd ask about history of schizophrenia and if they're on SSRIs. And like, that's what I'm seeing good guides do. And, the ones who are more inexperienced, and no judgment, because I fell into this too. Like, I wasn't asking some of those questions that I should have been asking. And like one of my very first ones, I didn't even like it didn't work because they were on an SSRI and I didn't know how to ask. Like, that's how irresponsible I was when I first started. So yeah, super interesting, but it's just made me look at things a little bit better. In fact, my best friend, who she had never had marijuana or a gummy, and I really like that from time to time. It helps me to get silly, which is really good for me because I'm not a very silly, I'm not really a funny person at all. I'm just kind of I'm more of a broody type. And I just wanted to like just laugh and be silly, because it can be so fun and words get so funny and all of that. And I giggle like when I was a kid, and I really enjoy that with friends. And so she had never had really good experiences with it. And I kind of kept pushing her just because I so wanted to be silly with her. And she ended up trying with a different friend anyway. And she ended up calling the cops because she got so paranoid and freaked out that she ended up calling 911. And now I've like pulled back from pushing her into this experience that I want her to have, because she just consistently has bad experiences on this thing.
Yeah, I know people who have to take 4 or 5 times the dose to have an effect. By the way, there's also a phenomenon for people who take edibles. Smoking it still does something, but taking edibles doesn't work at all. No matter how many times you take it, no matter how much you take, your body just doesn't process it. So there's a 3% of the population isn't affected by edibles at all. But I also know people who I would call highly sensitive people, HSP, and those folks can take, instead of a normal dose of like 10 milligrams, those folks can take 1 milligram, 2 milligrams, 2.5 maybe tops. And that is as big of a deal for them as you would be taking 20 or 30.
Yeah. I know some of those people. I have someone who can do a 0.5 grand of mushrooms and be on the moon, and that would do nothing to me. Yeah, that would do nothing to me.
Yep.
So be careful out there. And Liz has helped me. Some of these things I've learned the hard way. Some of these things I've not seen kind of my own whiteness in these spaces and my own privilege in these spaces. But definitely go check out Liz's work because it's helped me feel a lot more ethical in this space.
Yeah, I definitely will say, I think we all need to slow down and think about boundaries, ethics, as she put it, containers, you put it, containers for things. All issues in the world on some level require an awareness of like what the ethical guidelines are around that thing.
And this brings up another conversation that we should have another time about, because when we leave religion, you and me, especially coming from high demand religions, we're so sensitive to authority and like structures and guidelines and manuals. Like, I was in a time period where it was just like, I can't handle any of that. And I think what Liz is pointing to is like, there has to be a way that we can value expertise again. and do it in a healthier way. And sometimes I feel like people who have been hurt by religion, who have religious trauma, it's so hard to walk back into those spaces where we can recognize that someone can help and someone
Mm.
can be a guide or a helper or something like that. It took me a long time. And when I was working with my Sufi teacher, it took me a long time because he's a man and you and I have spoken with him, we've done podcasts with him, and it took me a long time to work with my triggers because he was doing everything so healthy. I've never had an issue with him going outside of healthy boundaries, but he's a man in authority, and I just struggled with that for so long. And yet
Mm.
he had so much to offer that is helpful for me because he's further along the path than I am. And it took me a long time to see the value in that again. And I think sometimes with the religious deconstruction space, we're not seeing that, hey, not all structure is bad, not all expertise is bad, not all people who have experience who are in some kind of leadership position is bad. And that was hard for me at first. What do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I was trying to get at that with the one question that got asked to her, that, I see all these unhealthy things about how religion sabotages the individual experience. And yet you do need the teacher. It goes back to the Kumare, which I think you've seen.
Mm-mm.
The gurus inside of it. You've never seen Kumare. Oh, you ought to. You ought to spend an hour and a half watching this. So Kumare is a documentary. I think it's American guy. He has Indian heritage, so he comes up with this idea that he's going to dress, talk, look like a shaman.
I've seen clips of it. I've never sat down and watched it. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. All right.
He basically creates a religion intentionally to fool people and goes hey, come along with me and watch how this goes.
Yeah.
And I think you would love it.
Yeah.
He says, his mantra is the guru is inside of you. So even as he's faking it and pulling people into a delusion, he is trying to plant the seed of you're the guru's inside of you. You're the guru. We do need teachers, and we need teachers who are healthy enough in their own egos that they don't sabotage the experience for their own gain, power, greed, influence, that they really are designed, right? Mormonism is so far from this. These top men set themselves up as the gurus. Yeah. They are the least likely person you should be having as your guru.
This is such a niche comment that would only make sense to Mormons, but the current prophet, he was asked, I don't know if you saw this clip, he was asked, how do you know if it's God speaking to you or God's will, or it's just you? And he said, when you've been called to a position of power, that's God's approval. And so what you say is what God would have you say. And so he's like, just say it because it is God. And so basically there was in his mind, there was no separation between his brain and what God would have him say, because he's the prophet, it's God. And it was one of the most unhealthy red flags I've ever seen. And I feel like a lot of people ex-Mormonism kind of missed it. I'll have to send it to you, but it was oh, Jesus Christ, that is so unhealthy to just believe that because I'm here, God, I'm speaking for God. There is no difference.
Isn't that that's what Applegate thought, and that's what Jim Jones thought, and that's what David Koresh thought.
Yeah, there was no boundary there. There was no oh, I pray about it and I fast and I ask other people and I, you know what I mean? There was none of that. He was just I am it was almost I am God. It was very scary to listen to.
The very nature of me working up through a system and now being at the top of that system automatically says that I am
what God would have me say. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Talk about dangerous idea. There's a dangerous idea.
And it is also scary, how easy, if I had no ethics or morality, and if I just wanted to make money, which for me, my thing is always it's not enough of a reason to live, just being a hedonist like that. But if I wanted to, it is scary, how much people would give me that power. That I could make a kick-ass cult and I could make some money, and the only thing stopping me is myself. That's what Donald Trump said. That is scary that Donald Trump said the only reason that he doesn't take over the world or something is because of his own morality. There's no one stopping him. But in this spiritual space where we're operating outside of containers and religion, there is no one stopping us here. And so we are getting a lot of unhealthy people causing harm and cultiness outside of, outside of religion.
Yeah. Yeah, I have so much to say about the system we came from. I'll save it for another day, but yeah, I'll get back to your question. Like I wish if we could ensure that the teacher truly has the experience to be the teacher. Again, you took yourself out of that role because you could sense that you weren't,
I'm not it.
this
Nope.
wasn't for you, right? So if we could just ensure that the person has that ability and that they are, again, that they're going to treasure the individual experience also, while also trying to put a container around that experience, then I think it'd be beautiful. And I think we do need those people. We need people at the heads of spiritual systems who know how to do that. My fear is that I know enough systems where that isn't possible.
Yeah.
And in the healthy systems, I can see people edging towards trying to do things for their own acclaim or for their own power and influence. And so I'm just so skeptical of religious systems, spiritual systems being trusted in the long run to do that almost all spiritual systems, if given enough time, will at least for a season turn on the people they're supposed to help and actually do harm to them.
Yeah. So much more to go into. We'll save it for another time. And just to let you guys know what's coming up next week, we're going to be talking about Pluribus, which is a show I really, really liked and loving this. By the way, Bill did this like off to the side in like 5 seconds. It was anyway. Which I like because my hair is kind of the same length as hers. I think it worked. So we're going to be talking about Pluribus, and this is one where I think we're going to disagree because sometimes our different values will disagree with each other. So I think we're going to have some fun debates with all the ethical concerns that comes up with this. I'm super excited. The week after, we're going to be doing Conspirituality, which is a pretty big platform talking about the intersection between cults, conspiracies, and spirituality. And then the week after that, we will be having Rhett McLaughlin from Rhett and Link, who's one of the OGs of YouTube, coming on the channel. So make sure that you're subscribed, and thanks for joining us today. And we have some awesome conversations coming up.
Awesome. I can't wait till next week. You mentioned hedonistic. I might be a little more
You're
hedonistic.
more hedonistic than I am. You're much more in your body than I am. Like you've always been, even just like with physical touch, like being like a way that you give and receive love, even just like in a non-sexual context. Like maybe it's like, I'm being tested for autism, and maybe that's like an autism thing for me, but that's just not for me. You've always been more embodied than me. And so I think it's going to lead us to different conclusions in this one, which I'm excited for. I'm sometimes more excited for when we disagree because we just agree on so much, because we've just influenced each other over the years and had this long form conversation. But anyway, it's going to be awesome. Yes. Make sure you tune in for next week.
Yeah, so folks, you won't want to miss it. Tune in for our conversation around Pluribus.
You've been listening to Britt Hartley of No Nonsense Spirituality.
And Bill Reel from the Almost Awakened podcast.
Together, we explore what it means to grow beyond belief systems and find meaning after deconstruction and outside of religion.
Britt has a master's degree in theology with a focus on the future of American religion and works as an atheist spiritual director, helping people navigate life beyond faith.
And Bill is a somatic trauma-informed coach and certified leader holding a level 7 diploma in strategic management and leadership. He helps people through faith transitions, deconstruction, and personal growth.
You can find Britt's courses, coaching, and her best-selling book, No Nonsense Spirituality, All the Tools, No Belief Required, at nononsensespirituality.com.
And you can find Bill's coaching, support groups, and podcasts at awakenandthrive.org, resources designed to help you awaken and thrive in the second half of life.
Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay open, and keep awakening. No nonsense required.